Hi everyone, and very warm welcome to today's SME Club meetup. For those of you who I've not met before, I'm Jen Quinn, Growth Manager at Virgin Money Manchester, and we are delighted to be sponsors of today's event. Like many of you, we're working from home at the moment, but it's lovely to still be able to connect and deliver events to support our local business community. Our key focus at the moment is to ensure that our customers are supported. Information on the support offered can be found on our website, and we'll be sharing that link with you following today's event. Please feel free to get in touch with me or the team if there's anything else that we can help you with. We'd love to hear how you found today's event. Please do tag us in your social media posts. We are at Virgin Money on all social platforms. Today's discussion topic is management is a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. Kieran McCourt of Alliance Manchester Business School will be chairing today's panel. So for now, I'll hand over to Kieran and look forward to catching up with you at our next event.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. I'm going to talk about why management is a dirty job, but somebody has to do it. So it's going to be a little bit of an interactive session this morning, so you might want to have a notepad and pen with you. We're also going to be taking some questions right at the very end, but as questions appear to you during the course of this presentation, this session, it's as well to just type them into the chat box in the corner. So I'm Kieran. I work with the Alliance Manchester Business School team in executive education. I've been with the school for about a year, and prior to that, I've spent about 25 years in sales and marketing roles in the UK and internationally. So what we're going to cover this morning is three segments, three parts. First of all, why is management considered a dirty job? Section 2 will be our love affair with leadership, and then bringing it all together at the end with how can we pursue a better understanding of management. Now, this session will be recorded, so you're welcome to download a recording. I think it's going to be available on YouTube after this event. And my slides will also be available through the Pro Manchester team. So to kick off, why is management a dirty job? We'll just take a minute and have a look at the screen. The role models for management, let's face it, aren't particularly good. I don't know if you want to take just a couple of seconds and see how many of those appalling managers you can name. Okay. Well, there's a real cast of characters there, and most of them are characterized by pretty bad management. Let's take a moment to look at your own experience. So if you can, just for a couple of seconds, think about some poor management experience you've had. Either you were managed by somebody badly, or you had a bad experience, or a colleague had a bad experience. Have a moment to just think about what were their worst qualities or behaviors. What were the things that they did that were unacceptable? So if you can just take just a few seconds, just write down a couple of words. Okay, have you got that? When I've done this as a live exercise, people have taken a long time. There's a very, very long list of character traits and flaws that they say are bad management. Here's just one example of a list of some of the worst qualities found in management. Lack of trust or untrustworthy. Managers who seem to go from one extreme to another. So some are very vague or set very unclear expectations, whilst the others are really sort of micromanagers and overly controlling. I think fairness is also a key feature of poor management. You know, doesn't reward fairly or is unfair in promoting or hiring people. So hopefully some of those things will be familiar to you, unfortunately. So a quick quiz, a few questions. We've established that managers don't have a great reputation. So what percentage of employees would trust a stranger more than their manager? So have a guess at this, have a think. What percentage would you estimate of employees who said they would trust a stranger more than they would actually trust their own manager? Take a second. What do we think? Is it 10%, 20%? Is it higher? Okay, well, the answer is 58%. Now that's pretty bad. Pretty bad statistics saying that we would, the vast majority of us would trust a stranger more than our own manager. Another question, so what percentage of employees said that their boss was the main reason for leaving their job? So it wasn't that they got a better job elsewhere, it wasn't they got a promotion, it wasn't that they had a change of circumstances, but what percentage of employees said that actually having a bad manager was the reason they left their job? Well, the answer is 44%. So it's not as high as the previous number, but it's still pretty unhealthy in terms of the reasons why people leave. And this is my favorite statistic. For those of you who may have seen some of my material before, you'll know this one pretty well. So what percentage of employees said that they would forego a pay rise if it meant seeing their manager fired? So that question again, what percentage of employees said that, yep, don't give me a pay rise if it means that I can see my manager fired? Do we think 10%, 20%, 30%? Well, it's actually a whopping 65% of people said, I'd rather you didn't give me a pay rise, but I'd rather I saw my boss fired. In fact, when I did this at a recent event, somebody said, yep, that's fine as long as I can actually watch it happen. So as we can see, management generally can have a pretty bad reputation, and we're going to come on to some of the reasons for that a bit later on. Primarily, a bad boss, has the power to make our lives hell. If you have a look around the screen, you can see they've got various powers, all of which exert an influence over our lives, which we don't often have that much control over. You know, they're responsible for giving us praise or giving us criticism, the dreaded annual performance review, salary review. They've got a lot of power, even just allocating work. You know, what projects am I going to work on? Managers have quite a lot of power, and how they wield that power can be the difference between a good manager or a bad manager. So going back to that first slide and looking at the characterization of managers in popular culture, you can see that they roughly fall into two camps. They're either monsters or they're fools. I've put Ebenezer Scrooge slightly out of that because even though he starts out as particularly a bad monster, he does redeem himself by the end of the narrative. But as we can see, the role models in society, managers aren't always great. They don't get a great PR, should we say. So much so that in a survey only last year, well, I'll ask you the question, what percentage of employees actually want to be appointed a manager these days? What do we think? 20%, 30%? There was a time when, you know, to be promoted to be a manager was a great accolade. But how many employees nowadays actually want to be employed or appointed as a manager? It's a paltry 9%, so it's not actually got a great reputation as a job anymore. And as I said, we can explore some of the reasons for that. So now we're going to move on to our love affair with leadership. So we've already seen that management's got a really bad reputation. What about leadership? Isn't there a slightly different angle here? People often see leadership as preferable to management. So take a moment. I'm sure there's a few names, faces up there that you recognize, that you can put names to faces. We don't have to look very far to look for examples of really kind of charismatic, dynamic and powerful leaders from the mainstream media. They can act as very, very important role models to lots of us. And when we think of those people, we often describe them as they're amazing or extraordinary individuals. They've got certain characteristics or qualities. They've got this ability to inspire and motivate people. As I said, they're charismatic, they're visionary, and sometimes they're rule breakers, rebels. They're somewhat unconventional. But generally, when you look at those people, you kind of think you've either got it or you haven't. And that's a myth about leadership that's been pervasive for a very, very long time. You don't have to look very far for some very interesting inspirational quotes about leadership as well. So let's take a minute to read some of them. So if you can read those, you can see that actually this is about action. This is about, you know, heroic leadership. A leader is one who knows the way and goes the way and shows the way. A couple more. This one I particularly like. A leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but they ought to be. Great leaders don't tell you what to do, but they show you how it's done. So the internet is full of these inspirational quotes, and they are, some of them, quite motivational. Here's a particular favourite of mine that really takes it to the extreme, and I apologise for the male-centeredness of this language. So a true leader has the confidence to stand alone, the courage to make tough decisions, and the compassion to listen to the needs of others. He does not set out to be a leader, but he becomes one because of by the equality of his actions and the integrity of his intent. It's a great idea. So it's a noble thought, apart from it being weighted towards men. But sometimes you can go a bit too far. That idea of being a heroic leader. We can't all be heroes. And this sets up possibly what you consider is a false opposite. So we often contrast leadership with management. As we've seen at the beginning of this session, management, it's a dirty word, it's got poor role models, it's got a poor reputation, whereas leadership is inspirational, it's about transformation, it's about change, and that's all really healthy. If we look at the way the opposites are set up, though, leadership, it's a lot to do with people and a lot to do with relationships. It's about influencing, inspiring, creating. Whereas management is the more boring stuff, this planning, organizing, it's working out rotas and budgets. But there are some problems with that sort of setup relating to leadership. So when you root leadership within an individual, it doesn't necessarily make it very accessible for anybody else. You could model yourself on Elon Musk, but there's only going to be one Elon Musk. How do you emulate him, and how can you be an authentic leader if you're trying to copy somebody else? The idea of individual singular great leaders also reinforces somewhat that perception that we have that leaders are born and not made. And that makes it difficult for other people who maybe aren't great leaders to become great leaders. And finally, one big challenge that I see with leadership is where influence is unchecked. If you're so charismatic and persuasive as a leader, how do you know when you're going to get it wrong? Do you surround yourself with people who are going to tell you when you've got it wrong? Now, lots of leaders do that. It's very healthy practice. But I'm just putting out there that idea that leadership, in terms of influence unchecked, can produce some negative results. For as many organizations which have been incredibly successful because of their charismatic leader, there's also lots of examples where that same charismatic leader has led them down a very difficult path or a path towards failure. In fact, many people now consider part of great leadership is having failed at something in the past. It also leads us to some other problems about, if it's rooted in the individual, can you teach it? Can you learn leadership? How transferable or scalable is it? And is it sustainable? Now, these present all sorts of challenges, both for an individual and also, more importantly, for an organization. And a big challenge I see in terms of leadership is when everyone is focused on the actual stuff of leadership, who's going to do all that boring management stuff? It sounds ridiculous, and everybody enjoys some of the wonderful aspects of being a great leader, being a great motivator, being an inspiration to people. But some of management is actually about getting work done. Now, what's the role of the leader in terms of getting work done? Because we all have had experiences of management. Sometimes being a manager is getting stuck in, rolling up your sleeves and pitching in. It's not always about directing others. How do you know when it's a time to be a leader or a time to be a manager? So let's take another look at that juxtaposition, those two different qualities, leadership and management. So a quick question. Two different examples, two different managers. We've got manager A, who can lead, they're a great leader, but they're not a great manager. Or manager B, who's a great manager, but isn't very inspirational, can't lead. So take a minute. Who would you rather work for? Would you rather work for manager A, who can lead but not manage, or manager B, who can manage but can't lead? Well, if you reach a decision, hopefully. I don't know how many of you are thinking manager A or manager B, but a lot of the research around this suggests that actually we need leaders and managers who can do both. So I'm sorry it was a bit of a trick question, the idea of setting one against the other, but the general consensus from a lot of the research in leadership and management is that actually we need leaders who can do both. So how do we bring this all together? So call this in pursuit of better management. Is there a better way to look at management and leadership rather than management bad, leadership good, and how do we bring the two together? Well, first of all, what do we expect from a manager these days? It's quite a complex and unforgiving role. These are just a short list of a few of the different roles and responsibilities that many managers and leaders actually have to carry out in their daily work, from administrator to problem solver, from talent developer to compliance officer, to coach and mentor, to even spokesperson, counsellor, or latterly well-being practitioner. We expect a lot from managers, and the list isn't showing any sign of shrinking. In fact, it's actually showing more signs of getting longer. And this is the big challenge for management. Very often, managers are promoted based on their experience, not always on their abilities. And the reasons they get promoted, let's say they're functionally very good in a team, they're good in their department, that's great, but that doesn't necessarily equip them for the next transition up to management. Great example is a salesperson. I've worked in sales organizations where the best area sales representative got promoted to a manager. Now, what made them a great sales rep didn't necessarily make them a great manager. And conversely, I've had some great managers who haven't been the top salespeople. So this is just a recognition of what got you here won't get you there. And that's where we have what we call the management gap. So another couple of questions for you. Knowing that there is this management gap, how many UK managers do you think have any sort of management related qualification? You know, if we say that a lot of managers are based on experience, they get promoted based on their experience. How many would you say actually have any sort of qualification in management? Just take a minute to think about that. Okay. Well, it's actually only 20%, or 1 in 5. That's not to say there's not some great managers out there, but it's to say that actually the vast majority of managers don't have any qualifications in management. They may have great qualifications in their area of functional expertise, but not necessarily in the area of management. Okay, here's another one. So we know that there's this management gap and not many managers are trained, but what percentage of organizations don't provide any training to their first line managers? Now, a first line manager is that person. There may be a supervisor, there may be a team leader. It's the first time they've been promoted and have got people or project management responsibility. So what percentage of organizations do you think actually don't train their first line managers? Okay, well, the answer is a shocking 71%. So we can see that management gap isn't shrinking. In fact, if anything, it's probably getting a little bit wider. And it seems to be a characteristic unique to management and leadership. How does this come about? Well, very often we take talented people, and because they're talented at what they do, they get promoted to a management position, but then just left, and they're expected to pick it up for themselves. I'm sure many of you have heard the phrase, the accidental manager. And this is really what we're talking about here. Somebody who suddenly finds themselves, because of their ability and their expertise and their success, they suddenly find themselves responsible for a team of people, very often ill-equipped to know how to manage them. Usually, we don't expect that in any other profession. You don't hear of the accidental psychiatrist or the accidental university professor. It's one of those weird inequalities with business and management, because we have a history where people just get promoted based on their experience, not on training. Management's almost considered like, well, it's common sense, isn't it? But there's no other career that I could see where you're allowed to hold such a powerful position without having any kind of training whatsoever. I'm not saying that there isn't natural talent, but as I said, many other careers, you have to train 2, 3, 4, or even up to more than 14 years to become proficient in that area. But what do we think about management? How long does it take to become a good manager? I asked a group recently and they said it's anywhere between 2 to 5 years, but that's with training, and that you could get faster, you could get better faster if you undertook some training. So what's the cost of all of this? Well, perhaps to the UK economy, it's an estimated 19 billion in lost working hours to poor management. And that's not a direct correlation to bad management, that's just lost working hours. It could be even higher. But this just puts a figure on what's this costing the economy, organizations, and individuals. So take a moment, because it's not all bad, it's not all doom and gloom. We know we've had good and bad managers. So now I'd like you to think for a minute of a manager from your own career who made a positive difference. Probably somebody that you could name who helped you up the career ladder or gave you support or had your back, but list some of the qualities they possessed or some of the behaviors that they demonstrated. So have a think just for a minute, just write a couple of notes down, Thinking of that manager, what did they do that was really great that you remember? So have you got your list? Well, hopefully some of the things that you've written down are so similar to some of the things that are on here. So maybe they were great at making decisions or building trust. Maybe they were great communicators. Maybe they were really good at using their emotional intelligence. If you take a minute and look at some of the words on this particular slide, you can see that we're talking about things that are to do with relationships, predominantly. You know, it's to do with the softer skills of management. So we recognize that having those good people skills are really important in terms of making you a great manager. But what about some of those more mundane tasks? What sort of tasks do you have to be competent at to be a really good manager? Well, this is a summary of a survey from HBR into 8,000 different organizations across 24 different countries, saying what are the really good management practices? What are the management practices that make some companies stand out from other companies? What are the practices that drive performance? And it came down to three things. First was setting targets. So what are our goals? What do we need to achieve? By when? What are the milestones? The second was monitoring against those targets. So making sure you're on track and using data to identify when you're coming off track. And finally, some sort of incentives to reward good performance or to at least identify problems with performance and provide support or training. So now we're starting to see a picture of management and leadership that could be a combination of both some very kind of process-driven qualities and also some personal qualities. So we've got the softer skills, the leadership behaviors and qualities. We've also got some management processes and functions. So how can we put that all together? Well, here's a different way of maybe looking at management and leadership, not as separate ends of the spectrum, but actually as these three intersecting skills. So let's take any management position. Let's say you're a CFO. Well, you're going to need some technical skills, aren't you? You're going to need those financial skills, the ability to read spreadsheets and balance sheets and manage the numbers. You're going to need that. You couldn't be a CFO without that technical expertise. And the same is true whether you're a marketing manager or engineering manager, factory manager, customer service manager. You do need some technical skills. But then we also need that combination of leadership and management skills. Leadership, if we can call it that, we're looking at those sort of softer skills, and management, those more process and task functions. Now, just to give you an example, here at the University of Manchester Business School, we run a 5-day program on leadership development. It's actually leadership and management, and we cover both those aspects of leadership and management. So we don't provide training for the technical aspects, but we can provide training for the leadership and management aspect. Taking them in turn, leadership, what are we talking about? Well, over our 5 days, we look at two key themes in leadership in practice and leading teams and talent. So the first one is actually about leading yourself. So we start off with psychometric, what kind of leader am I? What's it like to be on the receiving end of me? The idea in that is that before you can lead anybody else, you have to be able to lead yourself. And looking at teams and talents, that's about leading and managing others, especially those who might be different from us. All too often we can fall into that trap of liking and promoting those people who remind us a bit of ourselves or who are like us. That's normal, that's just human nature. But actually, it's really important to recognize difference and know how to develop that difference in other people. Next, we look at management. There's three areas that we're looking at really: finance, strategy, and projects. And in its simplest form, finance is really just about knowing the numbers. Now, this isn't turning anybody into being an accountant or a CFO. This is really allowing some managers and leaders access to some of the information they might not have had in the past. You might find yourself suddenly responsible for a budget, suddenly responsible for spend or sales projections. So you need to be able to understand the numbers. Strategy and innovation. That's really about understanding strategy as choices. Very often we think strategy is something that happens at board level and then just gets sort of cascaded down through the organization. But we look at strategy in the sense of everybody's responsible for strategy, and how you drive your strategy is through the choices that you make. And similarly with innovation, we tend to often think of innovation as a bunch of really creative people who come up with brilliant ideas. But we look at it in a slightly different way, saying that maybe innovation is a process. If you embed it as a process, maybe you can get more creative in the organization, irrespective of whether you think you're a creative person or not. And finally, as I said before, management is a lot about getting things done. So we look at projects and management. And that's a really, really useful element. How often do projects get delayed, hit problems, go over budget, have challenges from suppliers or challenges from customers? So understanding how to put together a project is really, really important. It's an area we spend a lot of time on, and give people some simple tools, even things like a pre-mortem. So not a post-mortem, but before you start a project, looking at a pre-mortem. What might go wrong and how might we mitigate it? Just to give you some insight, we don't just believe in the sort of the traditional classroom-based approach. A lot of our learning is done now online and through blended learning. And one route you can take with this program is really probably the best of all three. It combines those sort of core units that I've just discussed with some reflective practice. So it roots the work that you're doing in your everyday work. So it takes those subjects and makes you apply them to your workplace. And then finally, you can be supported with some executive coaching. And I think that's really a good combination of some taught and some reflective activity along with some practical experience. At the moment, we're offering a few free webinars just because face-to-face teaching at the school is suspended. We're doing a lot online in terms of providing courses, but we thought it would just be nice because a lot of people are in lockdown, just to provide some free material for people just to stimulate the brain cells while we're all sort of working from home. So there was, the first session was back in April called Success Doesn't Happen by Accident, and that looked at strategy and innovation, and that's available to download. And the next session will be on the 4th of June, and that's about that leadership and project management, about getting things done. As I said, they're free to register, and I can provide details through Brent Manchester. So let's have a quick look at the summary of what we've talked about this morning. So first of all, management may have a reputation as a bit of a dirty job, but it is still an essential one. All those things like planning, controlling, staffing, budgeting, reporting. They're not always the most exciting tasks, but they're essential for a lot of organizations. And as we've seen, things like setting targets, monitoring them, and incentivizing people are those three characteristics that set really exceptional organizations apart from just the average organizations. So management doesn't have a great reputation, but it's a really important job. Second summary that I'd like to show is that leadership isn't the antidote to bad management. It's actually, we need both. Chances are really it's just the fact that leadership has better PR than management. But truly, from what we can see, we need a combination of the two. It's also, I don't think it's very contentious to say that even under these circumstances, management roles are increasingly complex and demanding. It's going to get even more demanding as people adjust to this transition, this phasing back of going back to work, and this return to a new normal, whatever that might look like for people. So we're going to need better managers even more than we did before. And so to that point, we actually need to equip our managers and leaders better than we ever have done before. So those are my takeaways from today. If you want to look at your own leadership and you're looking for some guidance, I think there's no better example than to look at what you've written down for those managers who were terrible, and look at what you've written down for those managers in your life that were brilliant, that really made a difference, and act accordingly. But before we finish up, because then we'll take some questions, before we finish up, just want to talk about a last word on bad managers. You know, why is it that there's so much coverage, so many great characters out there in popular culture, in the movies and in TV for bad managers? Well, maybe psychologically there's something nice about mocking them. You know, we get to mock the manager from a safe perspective. We get to sit on our sofa and criticize them. You might say that some people secretly admire some of their behaviors. They get to say and do things that we normally wouldn't be able to say or do. But a lot of the time, the narrative arc of a story shows a leader actually being punished. So these bad managers get punished, they fail, we see their downfall, and we see justice prevail in a storytelling way that we don't often always see in real life. So maybe that's why we find them so engaging, that they are just, you know, great entertainment, and we get to perhaps enjoy mocking the manager from a very safe perspective. I'd like to add one thought to that. Perhaps it's not just that managers in popular culture are there to entertain us. What if they're actually fables and warnings? What if those caricatures are up there to say, this is what happens? This is the comeuppance that you're going to get if you are a really kind of aggressive or nasty or monstrous manager. So just perhaps it's worth remembering people like Gordon Gekko or David Brent and have them in mind the next time you're in a meeting. Because I know I did in my career, there was more than one occasion, I'm ashamed to say, that I'd catch myself speaking in a meeting and I'd start sounding a bit like David Brent. And when that happened, I just shut up. That's been a whistle-stop tour of why management's a dirty job, but somebody has to do it. I'm open to taking a few questions now, if that suits.
There's some questions in the chat, Kieran.
I haven't been able to see the chat on my screen, unfortunately.
I can read it to you then if you like.
Would you mind, Catherine? I'm sorry. I'll do my best to answer them.
No problem. Anonymous asks, do you feel there is any value in psychometric testing colleagues to understand how to best manage them?
Oh, that's a great question. So any value in psychometric testing in terms of how to manage them? I think yeah, I think there's two elements. I think the first element is just psychometric testing starts you on a really valuable conversation. What do I mean by that? Well, you know, if anybody has done a psychometric survey or a psychometric assessment, especially one on leadership, you might get the report back, look at it and go, oh, that sounds like me. That doesn't sound like me. So whether you kind of identify with it completely or utterly disagree with it, I think what's really valuable about any psychometric testing is it starts a conversation about what is hidden, what we take for granted, what we think of doing intuitively rather than consciously. And I think that's really, really important. So I don't always subscribe to the idea that people fit into neat boxes that can be easily assessed. But the important thing is that psychometric testing starts a really good reflective conversation. So that's the first thing I would say is very valuable. The second thing, I think, yes, it does. It can give you some insight into how other people tick. You know, we know that there are some people who behave in a certain way. I myself know what I'm like under pressure, and knowing that other people are different from me does have benefits. If I struggle with making decisions when I'm under pressure, you're going to be damn sure I'm going to have somebody on my team working with me who's really good at that. So for those two reasons, one, it starts the conversation, and two, I think it does give you some practical advice on not necessarily how to manage people, but understanding where their strengths are. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, we've got some more questions if you don't mind.
Fire away.
What are your views on 360 feedback? Is it worth including yourself in that, or how is best to get evaluation on your own management?
That's another really good question. I genuinely believe 360 feedback is really good. I think, you know, whether you include yourself in that or not is up to the design of that particular psychometric. I think the value is in hearing other voices coming back to you from different directions. I know that sounds an obvious thing to say, but yeah, no, I think it goes back to that thing, the Johari window, you know, how what is hidden from us, things that about our personality or about our behavior that we may be oblivious to, our blind spots. So I think 360s are really, very valuable, again, for a couple of reasons. I think firstly, they give you that blind spot access. But secondly, they give you material that you can, again, sort of reflect on and think, oh, actually, I didn't realize I did that as well as I do that. Or you can have some nice surprises as well as some not so nice surprises. So I think they're very good. They are time consuming, so I think you've got to be committed to them. And I think you've got to accept that they're just a snapshot in time. They're like a photograph. If you really want to look at progression and getting better as a manager, you probably want to do another one. I wouldn't say any sooner than 12 months after the first. So in terms of practical terms, do one, great, 360 is brilliant. Reflect on it. If you can, tie it to your own personal development plan, and then come back and have a look at it. Do it again. No less than 12 months later.
Fab. Have you any tips for how staff can help their manager to manage or lead better?
Wow. To manage or staff or lead better.
Sounds like a difficult one.
It is, because it puts me in a position, you know, I've been a manager, and just like everybody else, I did some things well and I did some things poorly. I think the tips would be starting with yourself. Definitely. That's the one thing that you can control. You can't always control events. You can't always, you know, expertly influence other people. So you can start with yourself. So I think things like managing yourself, I don't just mean managing your workload, but I mean, if you notice that you're getting stressed about something, or you're feeling anxious about something, or you're getting excited about something, just be a bit more self-aware and recognize, okay, that's how I'm feeling at the moment, because it might just be influencing your judgment and also, more importantly, your behavior. I read a very interesting article just yesterday about managers who unconsciously communicate their anxiety to their staff. So I think probably I can't give you any practical advice for this person in this situation, because most management and leadership, I believe, is context specific. What I can say is what's helped me is the more I've focused on being self-aware, reflective, and managing myself, I feel that the more effective I've been as a manager. Of course, it helps to get some training as well.
Brill. Last question, I think. What constitutes micromanagement? How do you know when you are doing too much or too little with your team?
Wow, that's a corker. I love that question. Okay, I think micromanagement, you know you're doing it if you've got a massive workload and nobody else is doing their work. I think that's a tangible. If you've got a never-ending to-do list and you see other people who you manage with capacity, then micromanagement is almost the enemy of delegating. But when you delegate, you've got to trust people. You've got to trust people to do it in a different way from you and also get it wrong. So I think you've got to have a very different attitude and mindset to avoid micromanaging. So the first thing is, if you're not going to micromanage, you need to make sure you've got a culture where people know it's okay to make mistakes. You can give them feedback on what they're doing well and where maybe something needs a tweak. But the other thing about micromanagement is you can ask questions without micromanaging. I think I've always found that useful. So instead of getting stuck into the detail, you know, I can say to people, okay, Dave, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that this project is going to come off? And Dave says it's a 7. Okay, so in my past, I've micromanaged. It's a terrible thing. I would have drilled into Dave, wanting all of the data, wanting all of the evidence, show me what you're doing, to be absolutely, completely sure and confident that we would deliver. Now, I think there's a slightly better way of doing it now. And that way is to say, okay, Dave, you say it's a 7. What would need to be different for you to feel that confidence level up to a 9 or even a 10? So I'm not telling Dave what to do. I'm asking Dave a question. So I think you can achieve the aim of wanting a project to be delivered correctly and on time without micromanaging by the tactical use of bringing in questions. So you can ask people, okay, Dave, what would need to happen for it to go from a 7 to a 10? And Dave says, well, I'm not sure of the numbers. Okay, let's have a look at the numbers. So you're not micromanaging the whole thing. You're just helping Dave get to that answer in those areas where there's maybe a little bit of a squeak. So hopefully that's answered the question.
Perfect. That seems to be it for the questions, Kieran.
Okay, well, it was a brief one this morning. I always believe that the less said, the better. But can I just say on behalf of the Alliance Manchester Business School, thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you to Virgin Money, and of course, thank you to Pro Manchester for organising this. And as I said, the materials will be available after this in terms of the recording and the slides from today. And please, if you would like to get in touch, please feel free. As you can probably tell, not going anywhere at the moment, so I'd love to hear from you.